Dr. Farid Fata enjoyed the type of popularity to match his million-dollar lifestyle. He lived in this Tony mansion and ran several upscale clinics in eastern Michigan. When Patricia Hester started feeling ill in 2010, she says she knew exactly where to go.
He's world-renowned, and when you went in his office, he was top doc.
That first visit is a day she will never forget.
And he went over the results that he said he had, and that I had MDS, a myelodysplastic syndrome, a terminal cancer of the blood, and that if
he did say
it is a terminal disease.
Hester's story is similar to dozens of other patients who prosecutors say Fata told they too had cancer and needed immediate treatment. People like Robert Sobere, who Fata falsely diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer in 2010.
Your mouth drops, your heart sinks.
Imagine one moment not knowing how long you will live, then after years of chemotherapy or other toxic treatments finding out your doctor lied. You never had cancer at all.
What I wanted to do to him right now was I couldn't repeat what I wanted to do. It was unbelievable.
So you were under treatment for 3 years,
3 years.
Under Dr. Fata?
Yes.
And then 3 years later you find out
It's a lie. It's all a lie.
Relief at learning they did not have cancer turned to rage for hundreds of former patients of Dr. Fata, like Hester and Sobere, just 2 of more than 500 victims.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. This is going to be another difficult one. Not quite as difficult as the Hacienda case, but very close. I would say there's a 1% difference there. When you go to a doctor, you expect to be helped. They take an oath not to harm. Well, somewhere along the way, Dr. Farhad Fata of Detroit, Michigan, started breaking that oath to the detriment of hundreds of patients, all for the sake of billing their insurance just a few more dollars. And today we're going to talk about the Detroit hematologist and oncologist that diagnosed every patient, regardless of whether they had it or not, with cancer, and proceeded to pump their bodies full of chemotherapy. And we're going to get to that right after a little bit of housekeeping. I'm dropping a timestamp below for those of you who want to miss it. But right now, a shout out to my wonderful channel member, Zachary Reese, who is also a patron. Thanks so much, Zach. Chef Betsy, Flame Lily, Hippie Dotson, Kimmy Middleton, Joe Guitar, Kat Middleton, Enigma X, Sherry Hendricks, Maybe Sunshine, also a patron, and Stephanie Mertz, also a patron. Thank you so much. And to my wonderful patrons, Maybe Sunshine, Lori Holmes, Zachary Reese, Kimberly Jolly, Kate Willett, Lauren Kirk, Sarah Carney, Andrea Lee, Tabora Sumners Cooper, Stephanie Mertz, Demelzo Pasco. And thank you guys. You make this job much easier to afford the things that I need. If you'd like to join them, membership button is down below next to subscribe. Also subscribe if you haven't. Half of my viewers aren't subscribed, so I hope today is the day I earn your subscription. That's the most important thing you can do for the channel, and giving it a like and a share and watching and commenting. If you'd like to join my Patreon, also down below. It's simply a means for me to afford the things that I need to improve the channel. And with all that being said now, let's get in to our case for today. Dr. Farhad Fata, the evil cancer doctor. Dr. Fata was born in Lebanon in 1965 to a Melkite Catholic family. He obtained his medical degree in Lebanon in 1992, upon which he immigrated to the United States and retook residency in New York City at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn from 1993 to 1996. Also, from 96 to 99, he was a fellow in hematology and oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan, a very prestigious cancer research hospital, and became eventually an attending physician at Gessinger Medical Center in Danville, Pennsylvania from 2000 to 2003. So he worked as an attending in coal country. So he went from big city Manhattan to small town blue collar, and that's how he got. And it was probably that kind of solidified his desire to serve a more blue collar population. So when he left Danville, he went to Rochester Hills, Michigan, an area just outside of Detroit, and for the next 10 years, grew his hematology and oncology practice into 7 different offices surrounding the greater metro Detroit area. He was in downtown, he was in the suburbs, he was all over. And eventually during this time, he also became a naturalized citizen. Now, he has built himself as the cancer doctor for Detroit. Think about it. In whatever area that you live, there's probably a doctor and a lawyer that have the name. They're the billboard guys, the ones you see the little cheesy commercials for, the ones that you see on the billboards, that you may see people in your area memeing them, because, here in this general area where I live, we have Alexander Shonara, who is a lawyer. He has several firms in Alabama and Tennessee, and he's a personal injury lawyer, and on Facebook you will see people saying, calling Shonara about stuff like that. So those people, you've seen those people. So he was that for oncology and hematology, which is study of the blood. Oncology is study of cancer. That kind of pervade in the Detroit area. If somebody had cancer, that's who they went to, him and his associates. His clinic, known as Michigan Hematology Oncology, was born with 7 different offices. He also married his wife, Samar, who became the chief executive officer and chief financial officer of his company. They would later divorce, and she would flee back to Lebanon, but we'll get to that. Basically, he became known for treating various types of blood cancers. And he went one step further than a lot of other doctors, because a lot of other doctors would do the initial screening and then send your lab work to either public labs like a Quest or some other places, or to the local hospital to have all of your diagnosis done. In addition, many of them, if you needed chemo or radiation, they would send you to the hospital or a actual radiology chemo treatment center that wasn't owned by them. They would send you there for treatment, and of course they got doctor's fees for coming over and visiting you and checking you out while you were there. So that's the way a lot of doctors did it. He did something different, which seemed very innovative at the time, and is actually pretty commonplace today, but if you look at what's going to happen, you realize why he did it. Because if you're diagnosing a patient and then sending them elsewhere to get their treatment and to get the lab work done, it's a lot harder to fake diagnosis because you have checks and balances there. But what he did was he pretty much put his own advanced hematology lab in an office. Most of the time doctors just have very basic labs. They can do, CBCs, sugar counts, your analyses, very basic blood work, strep tests in the office. He had a more advanced where they could literally screen for cancer. He also put in his own pharmacy. Remember what was the key telling of the pain clinics that were basically pill mills? They have their own pharmacy. And he also put in his own infusion center for chemo and radiation treatment facility. So he had a center that was owned by his company that he would send these people to, as well as getting their prescriptions for, because when you get prescriptions for chemotherapy, it has to be perfectly mixed by a pharmacist. So you have a pharmacist that measures it and puts it into saline and everything that you need to have it infused. And so his pharmacies were doing that, as well as the lab results coming from the labs in his offices. And at his height of popularity, he was treating 17,000 patients simultaneously. And he had a great reputation. I don't think he was always full of malice. He probably was doing a good job treating, but he eventually became known as somebody that just wanted to kill the cancer. And that's not a bad thing. Instead of following basic protocols for chemo and radiation that are prescribed by U.S. standard, he became known for more aggressive. He would give you either stronger drugs, more of the drugs, or double your infusion schedule. Whereas the U.S. standard is usually pretty not as aggressive, and because you have a lot of side effects that come from radiation and chemo, not just hair loss. It affects your heart, it affects your other major organs. It can make you very sick. And so people in the United States, we will give somebody chemo and allow them several weeks to recuperate so that we're not just hitting them. But he became a pioneer in what's known as the European protocol, in which he would give higher doses more frequently to kill the cancer quicker. But as you can imagine, the side effects to this are also triple-fold. Another thing that was unusual in his practice, he had several other doctors that worked with him. And they would all complain about the amount of surveillance that went on at all of the clinics. For example, cameras everywhere. Probably listening devices too. They felt they couldn't walk down the hall without a surveillance camera on them. Also, he spent such little time with his patients. For example, the other doctors or any normal doctor, especially when it's something as serious as cancer. I know we've all been to doc in the boxes or walk-in clinics for sore throats or what have you, and they might spend 5 minutes with us, and then the nurse comes in and gives us our shot or comes in with the prescriptions. But something like cancer, they're going to spend at least 15, 20, 30 minutes with you to really go over everything, because this is serious. This is life-threatening, literally. So where the other doctors were doing that and seeing 2 to 3 patients an hour, he was literally spending 3 to 4 minutes with a patient, allowing him to literally see 20 patients an hour. It was just an assembly line. He would go in, talk to him, boom, cancer, boom, cancer, boom, cancer, boom, cancer. And walk right out. The nurse would come back in with their prescription for their chemo and their schedule and a way to set up and already book them an appointment at his infusion center. That's how quick it went. And the other doctors became very, very suspicious of this. And also, it just seemed to be, an assembly line. And also, he rarely took time off, if ever, because he did not want other doctors to see his patients. Now, in a normal group practice like that, the doctors cover for each other when they're off. You see my patients, I see your patients. It's no big deal because these doctors are doing things correctly. But like most scammers, they don't take time off because they're always afraid that what they're doing will be uncovered by whoever's taking their place. So he rarely, if ever, took time off and allowed other people to see his patients. Even if a doctor was on call, if one of his patients had an emergency, they would refer them to him, even if he wasn't on call. Strange. The first red flag happened when a woman by the name of Maggie Dorsey was diagnosed with cancer in 2007 and underwent huge rounds of intensive chemotherapy and radiation over 7 months, and then found out from a different doctor that she went to for a different problem that looked at her blood cell count and knew that there was no way she's ever had cancer. And so she went to another oncologist and got a third opinion, and no cancer. She's never had cancer. But because of the intensive chemotherapy, she couldn't walk. She was wheelchair bound. So she sued him, and that was settled out of court in 2009. Now, one of the biggest, because he got his naturalized citizenship in 2009. Why wasn't this case part of it? Because that's just a flaw in our system. Because if you are buying for U.S. citizenship and you are currently in the process of settling a case where you misdiagnosed somebody with cancer, why wasn't that brought up? Now, I suppose because it was the first time he's ever been called out on anything. Maybe it was, malpractice does happen. That's why doctors require to have malpractice insurance. So probably his first time, and they just thought, well, just a simple malpractice suit. So I get that. But then knowing what went on to happen, I don't know what happened there. Maybe I'm wrong. If you have any, if you have gone through the immigration process yourself and know how that works, if you could drop that below, let me know, would that not have been a red flag? Now, from here, I'm going to take you over to the website of the American Cancer Association, where we're going to go over side effects of chemotherapy. And these are true whether you have cancer or whether you don't. This is the stuff that chemotherapy and radiation can do to you, even if even if you need the medicine. So think about how needlessly a lot of these people suffered. So we're going to hop over there and talk about that. Here we are, American Cancer Society, side effects of chemotherapy. Now let's understand what chemotherapy is. It is a solution of drugs and things that are poisonous to living tumors, to the living masses that tumors are in your body or the cancer that's in your blood. And they are lethal. And what they do is they give you pre-measured components. All of them are different medicines, in the hopes that the poison will kill the cancer before it kills you. So it's not good for the body. And some of the normal side effects are listed here. Now, this is for normal chemotherapy doses. Now, think about the accelerated aggressive doses that Dr. Fata was given, so he could bill more. These things would probably be triple-fold, but basically you're looking at fatigue, hair loss, bruising and bleeding, an infection, anemia, nausea, vomiting, appetite changes, constipation, diarrhea, sore mouth, weight changes, changes in the urinary tract, mood changes, destruction of your libido, fertility problems, and if given in long enough and high enough doses, it can actually affect your vital organs and cause death. Hence the ones that one guy lost all of his teeth, all of his hair. Another woman had to undergo physical therapy to relearn how to walk. You had people that went into kidney failure. All kinds of stuff from what he was doing. And that's why this is such a heinous crime. Red flag number 2 was the very next year in 2010, where he was interviewing for a new infusion nurse, a nurse to, oversee patients' chemotherapy, as well as just a general practice nurse. He interviewed a woman who had over 10 years experience in oncology nursing by the name of Angela Swaintek. When she entered the building, she said the first thing she noticed was the very crowded, 3 deep, almost standing room only waiting room. She said it reminded her more of a pill mill, the pain clinic, than a cancer clinic. But she said, okay, cool, maybe they're just an extremely busy practice, and I'm going to be busy. I like to be busy, so this is good. And then as she was taken back for her interview, waiting for the doctor to talk to her and his wife, who was the CEO, she noticed how quickly Dr. Fata went from room to room. And she said to her, she's never seen any oncologist, no matter how well they know a patient, go that quickly from room to room. That there's always more follow-up than that. So that was red flag number 2. Then she toured the actual infusion center, and she noticed how crowded it was. Every chair filled with more people waiting, 2 to 3 deep. And she said, this is like factory oncology. She said, this gives me the creeps. And she said, so of course she finished the interview. She never went in for another interview. She wasn't interested, but what she did do is contact the medical board and the FBI and posed a written complaint just saying things didn't feel right there and could they please look into it. And unfortunately, nothing ever happened. She got a letter in 2011 from the FBI saying there was no evidence to support an investigation. In the interim, while that nurse had written the complaint, the practice had saw fit to hire an actual office manager for the chain so that the CEO wasn't doing everything, and they hired a man by the name of David Karadesh, who would end up being one of the 2 whistleblowers in this case. Now, if you want to see more on I'm going to go over the basics, but if you want to see more about it from his point of view, there are two excellent true crime shows that have done exposés. That is, CBS's Whistleblower did an excellent expose on Mr. Karadesh's story, as well as American Greed also did a good one. And it went from more of a generalized, but if you want to see Karadesh's side of the story, Whistleblower, that episode, and I believe it's season 2, is excellent. But they hired him around 2012, and he started noticing the weirdness. So he started keeping a log. He noticed how quickly how quickly Dr. Fada saw patients in relation to the others. He also was amazed at the amount of cancer diagnoses that Dr. Fada got as opposed to the others in the practice. In fact, he commented that it almost seemed as if the other doctors on standard, 3 out of 10 people were diagnosed and actually needed treatment. For Fada, it was more like 8 out of 10, and he said that was uniquely unusual. And then there was the time that he was tasked by his wife, the CEO, Sarah, that basically asked him to get an insurance clerk to tabulate how much more insurance money could they bill if they lengthened the time of the treatments, pushed it out another hour. Yeah. And when that clerk reported back to David that it would only increase it by about $22, and he reported that, and the doctor got angry, it was evident to him something fishy was going on. Coupled with the fact that, lots of times when people are diagnosed with cancer, depending on how far along they are, their age, or just generally how they feel, sometimes they'll refuse treatment and just choose to go out with dignity. Well, most doctors are sympathetic to that, and they don't give the patient a hard time, even though they might advise them to seek treatment. According to David Karadesh, Dr. Fada would go almost into an insane rage if he spoke to a patient that refused treatment. He would say things like, well, I'm only trying to help them, but, even God is misunderstood, so I'm like God, I'm misunderstood. Just weird, wacky stuff. So, this all kind of came to a head in 2013 when Fada diagnosed 54-year-old Monica Flagg with multiple melanoma. Basically, this type of cancer requires pretty much lifelong chemo to keep it from going into the final stages. So, in July of that year was her first dose of chemotherapy, and shortly afterwards, she had an accident where she broke a leg in 2 places, and Fada was on vacation, one of the rare times he took vacation, and so she ended up in the hospital, and one of his associates, Dr. So Mongale, happened to see her, but even though she had broken legs because she was, had a chart that said cancer patient, they called Michigan Hematology and Oncology, and for the doctor on call to come see her because she's a cancer patient. That might affect because she's on chemo, the healing of her bones are going to be affected. And he came in to see her and then looked at her chart at the blood tests that were drawn when she came into the ER and said that her numbers, even after chemotherapy, were not consistent with an active cancer patient. So he did not mention mention this to her at the time. He simply saw her, advised the orthopedic surgeon on how to treat her leg, and then he dismissed himself, going immediately to the office of MHO where she was treated to go over her medical records. He was quite concerned. So, upon looking at all of her records, he determined that her blood tests were in no way consistent with cancer. That there's no way that if the cancer was at the stage that Dr. Fada had said, that chemotherapy would have altered her blood this much. So he just thought she was a healthy woman. So he did go back to the hospital and talk with her. and advised her not to return to MHO, not to do any further chemotherapy treatments, and he recommended to her another oncologist in town and have her test rerun. And she did. She didn't have cancer. Never had cancer. So she, of course, sued the clinic. But this fed on top of what Dr. Mengele was already suspecting. He had confronted Dr. Fata before about the amount of the European method he was using. And also, he was also suspicious about, the whole thing about how much more money can we get for, infusing another hour. And also, Dr. Fata had started using a drug known as IVIG, which is only used to treat people that are immunocompromised. Basically, in this IVIG treatment, they create a serum from like 20,000 donors. They take elements from their blood, and it's used to specifically treat and boost people's immune system. Think of it as a specialized boost for your immune system. He was starting to infuse patients with that, as well as with chemotherapy, as well as high doses of iron. Because if you're on chemo and you have a blood-based cancer, lots of times they will give you iron to help with the anemia you're going to get. But he was starting to do all of this for the majority of his patients. And Dr. Mangala had already confronted him about it, and the doctor promised not to use as much IVIG, and that put a whole lot of suspicion into Mangala about what's really going on here. And he was already in the process of seeking out another job so he could get the heck out of there. And he also started acting weird. He started whispering with other doctors, in the corners where there were no cameras, and David Karadesh caught wind of this and actually confronted Dr. Mangala about why he'd already turned in his notice by this point, and he was confronting Dr. Mangala about why he had turned in his notice. Dr. Mangala was honest and said that he was leaving primarily over the IVIG use when it wasn't warranted, and David added this to his checklist of what things to check on. And aside from the statistic that 8 out of 10 of Dr. Fata's patients was diagnosed with cancer and needed chemo, he started looking at the amount of people that got the IVIG as well as iron infusions. And he said that, on average, only 1 out of every 10 would need that. And after looking at most of the patients, he discovered out of all of the patients, they were talking hundreds to thousands here, only about 40 of them needed it, actually. And so he realized, after having other doctors view this, that there was something very wrong here. And David Karadesh and Dr. Mangala went to the FBI and the medical board and they'd made copies of records and stuff, which, that's definitely a HIPAA violation, but, whistleblowers do get a certain amount of forgiveness. And they took all of this to the FBI, and the FBI asked them to remain in the practice and feed them information. Well, by this time, Mangala's notice was up and he was already out, so it all fell on Karadesh. And he started keeping look over at the insurance records, over everything else, and fed the FBI as much information as they needed. He also wore a recording device. He allowed his area to be wired, as well as allowing places like the lab and the other areas to be wired underneath the doctor's nose, and the FBI got all the information they needed. August 6th, 2014. Dr. Farhid Fata was pulled over by federal agents on his way to work, and when they stopped him, they asked him if he knew why he was being detained, and he smugly answered, "Well, I ran a stop sign, maybe that's it." And they go, "Do you honestly think the FBI pulls people over for running stop signs?" "No, you're going to jail for medical fraud." And so they arrested him because it was found that he had literally not only abused his patients' bodies and put their lives in danger, he had also defrauded Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurers of hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was arrested. He was also that same day, FBI basically raided all of the clinics. Other doctors were still seeing their patients around this, but Fada's patients were dismissed. Were told to reschedule, and they essentially started searching all the practices, the infusion clinic, the pharmacy on federal warrant. It was at this time that Dr. Fada's wife confronted David, and David admitted that he was the whistleblower, and she fired him on the spot. Now, Fada was held on a $170,000 bond, but because they found that his wife still had assets of $9 million that had not been seized by the FBI, they feared that this was a reason that they let him go. They were going to flee to Lebanon, which does not have a extradition treaty. They persuaded the judge to raise his bond to $9 million, essentially everything they had left. So he waited out his entire time between trial in Metro Detroit Correction Facility. He was arraigned on charges of 553 different charges of coercing or falsely, with knowledge, misdiagnosing people with cancer and asserting them to chemotherapy treatments that they did not need, and several counts of insurance fraud to the tune of about $34 million in overbilling. He was facing 175 years in prison plus cancellation of his medical license. So he pleaded out September 20, 2014, before federal judge Paul Borman. He pleaded guilty to 13 counts of healthcare fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to pay and receive kickbacks, and 2 counts of money laundering. In return, they promised not to deport him, because that was also part of it. He has just become a citizen, so they were about to put deportation and immigration falsehood charges on him. So they dropped that, and he was sentenced on July 3rd of 2015, where he faced about 177 of his victims, where he had to stand there and listen to everything they had suffered, and he did apologize. But he was sentenced to 45 years in prison and sentenced to pay back $1.7 million in fines, even though he still had about $9 million. Probably half of that's gone with the legal defense, because, his wife, she divorced him, went back to Lebanon. Now, this does not protect him from the countless other suits that came in from insurance companies and private individuals, so he settled most of those out of court. And basically will be serving his time in federal prison in Salter, South Carolina, due to be released October 9th, 2052, when he will be 87 years old. Now, one important thing to know about whistleblowers like David Karadesh and Dr. Mangala: they often are rewarded with anything that the government can recover. They are often rewarded for their whistleblowing. So David Karadesh, who was not only an employee, but kind of blacklisted from, managing medical practices in Detroit because he was a whistleblower, and I think that's kind of a dumb thing. If you're not doing anything legal, why would you care? And Dr. Mangala did not seek any financial restitution. He says, I'm an oncologist, I make plenty of money, don't need to do that. So they did pay David Karadesh a settlement. He got about 1%, so he probably, 1%, so he got a couple of $100,000 based on the total recovery. Not just the $1.7 million in fees, but they had seized everything, so he got 1% of that. So he's not going to have to worry about working for some time. But wasn't over for David Karadesh. Somehow, Dr. Fada was able to get a blog through a friend published, and he verbally and openly threatened David Karadesh, and Karadesh feared for his life, so he did leave Michigan. And this led to reforms in Michigan about insurance regulations and rules regarding pharmacies and infusion centers. So it has led to some reform, and basically he sits there. He did try to get his guilty plea thrown out, saying that it was done under coercion in 2018, but that was denied. So that's the story of Dr. Fada. Hope you enjoyed it. I will see you very soon. Keto Comics.